powers of 10, the SOL 71A that you just took the little question practice on. Just a reminder, when you see something that has a negative exponent, it does not mean that it's a negative number. Remember, this tells us that we can write this out in many different ways. We can write it as a fraction or a decimal, because negative just means it's a number less than 0. So if you remember, the exponent tells us the number of zeros. Tells us the number of zeros. So for example, if I wanted to write this as a decimal, I would put 3 zeros and then a 1. And the decimal, of course, goes behind the first 0. If I wanted to write it as a fraction, I would write it as a 1 over top of 1,000. The reason I know it's 1,000 is because it has to have 3 zeros. I could also write it as a fraction like this, where I just turned it into a positive 3 and made it a fraction. I could write it as a fraction, 1/10 times 1/10 times 1/10. I know there's 3 of them because they're negative power of 3. So I want you to think, if I had a negative 4, how could I write this? I could write it as a fraction with just the positive 4 at the bottom. I could write it with 4 zeros and a 1. I could write it as a fraction with 4 zeros, so 10,000. Or I could write it with those 1/10. I would need how many of them? Hopefully you're thinking 4. So the secret here is the negative exponent does not mean a negative number. It tells us that we turn it into a fraction or a decimal.